Okay, so back once again with another lecture video. So this is part 2 of chapter 5 in capacity planning for products and service. So we have some technical difficulties in our previous chapter. So we want to continue. Okay, so this will be part 2. Okay, so we are now in um, steps for capacity planning. So in relation to some key decisions and some factors we need to consider with our strategy formation. So what are the different steps in capacity planning? Number one, we need also to consider, okay, our estimated future capacity requirements. Okay, so meaning to say, it's a long-term plan for the organization. It's a long-term planning for capacity with relation to the demand. Okay, an estimate also or a forecast of the future capacity will be required because some of our assets, okay, in the form of our space or land, we cannot adjust it, no, pag nabuo na natin yung building, pag nabuo na natin yung manufacturing plant, eh, hindi na tayo basta-basta nakakapag-adjust. So future estimate is important. Okay? Uh, but of course, our existing capacity, okay, must also need to consider or to be considered. So we need to evaluate our existing capacity and again, give due importance also to some future estimate of our capacity requirements. So present and future, okay? With that also we need to identify different alternatives, okay, that can be considered in our capacity planning, okay, with regards to as mentioned kanina, yung capacity cushion, okay, what are some adjustment that can be made? So these are alternatives, okay. Conduct financial analysis. So you don't want also our assets or financial assets to be tied up with our overstated capacity. Okay, so financial analysis is important. Assess some qualitative issues. Okay? So we need also to define our level of qualities that we need to produce, the quality level. Okay? Selecting some of the alternative, okay? Implementing alternative chosen and monitor our result. So basically, it's more on future capacity requirements and consideration with existing capacity, identifying different capacity alternatives, conducting financial analysis to define which of the following alternatives is most feasible to the organization, some quantitative issues, and then finally selecting, okay, the alternative or the capacity alternative that is intended by the organization, okay, before implementing our chosen capacity planning alternative. Okay, but what is important is of course no monitoring the result, whether or not we define the right capacity in our operation or should we make some more adjustment if it is possible. Okay, moving forward, okay, we have now capacity forecasting or forecasting capacity requirements. Okay, in estimating our capacity or forecasting our capacity, we need to consider the following. Okay, what is the long-term and short-term capacity needed for the organization? This is very vital because again, no, okay, we want to define our capacity needs and we need to define it, okay, versus the long-term whole or the short-term whole of the operation. Okay, so we need to say uh, we need to have an estimate whether our capacity needs, okay, will be defined on a short-term basis or a long-term basis. Okay, another is the long-term capacity requirements, okay, relates to overall capacity such as ito, facility size, trends, and cycle. So we need a good forecast for that. No? Okay, while the short term relates to variation such as season, randomness, and irregular fluctuation in demand. Yan. So we need to make it clear whether or not our forecast, okay, is a long-term or a short-term forecast, okay, answered by our capacity planning. Okay, moving forward, okay, some example of calculating our processing requirements. For example, okay, in this table, we have 3 products, and with consideration of the annual demand and the standard processing time per unit of each product according to ours. So as you can see, product number 2 takes the longest, okay, while product number 3 is the shortest time, okay, and our overall processing time needed to produce these 3 products. Okay, so we have the following: 2,000, 2,400, 1,400, with a total of 5,800 hours. Okay, now if the annual capacity is at 2,000 hours, then we need 3 machines to handle the required volume of, let's say, 5,800 hours divided by 2,000 hours per machine. That would include, that would mean 2.9 machines requirement. So this is an example of a simple example of calculating process requirements. Okay, so again, no, if machine can handle a volume of 2,000 per hour, and our processing time requires us to produce 5,800 for 3 products. So overall, we need at least 3 machines to produce the required demand. Okay? So dito meron pa tayong cushion kasi 2.9 pa lang to. Ibig sabihin, we can still extend up to at least 10% or less than 10% capacity. Okay, moving forward. Okay, what about for service capacity? Yan. So these are in terms of restaurant, yan, yung mga resort, yung mga events place, yung mga function area, etc. No? We need to consider, we need to consider to place our services, okay, near our customer. So meaning to say, capacity and location must be closely tied because basically they give same importance or same level of importance. Second, we have inability to store services. So we need to consider that. No? Services are intangible. We cannot store them. So therefore, the capacity must also be matched with the timing of demand. Okay? Because of course, no, this also demand or entails manpower or human resource. And finally, the degree of volatility of demand. Okay? So which are the peak demand periods and which are the low demand periods. Because again, okay, it does not only talks about our capacity and our location, but also our capacity may be defined also by the number of human resources that we have. Okay? Moving forward, in-house outsourcing. So when you talk about outsourcing, basically, we talk about obtaining goods or services from an external provider. So this time, we want to consider some available capacity that we can outsource, okay, expert, okay, quality consideration, nature of demand, the cost, and the risk. Okay, so again, okay, we want to consider whether our capacity is enough to provide an in-house output or should we outsource or should we obtain our goods and service from an external supplier. So most of the time, these are crucial decision for operations manager because say for example, no, instead of expanding their operation, they choose to maintain status quo in the number of their capacity. While the demand may exceed the level of output or supply that we can produce, okay, the surplus will just be outsourced from an external supplier. Yan. Kaya ang tanong dyan, okay, okay, should we continue to outsource? Okay, or should we try to expand, okay, our operation? And again, we go back to that concept we discussed before regarding short-term and long-term capacity planning. So if, for example, the operations manager or for example, the management would see the fluctuation or the increase as short-term, you would rather outsource. Okay, but if you see that, let's say it would be a perpetual increase in demand, okay, so we need to expand our operation. But then again, outsourcing must take into consideration again the following. The level of risk, the cost, again, the nature of demand, whether it will be volatile or stable increase, whether or not the outsourcing company can also produce the quality that we intend to provide our customer, their level of expertise, and again, whether or not there are available um, outsource company. Yan. Moving forward, okay, developing capacity alternative. Again, we don't take chances. There should be alternative in our operations. And in as much that we want to define, and plan our capacity, we need to consider that we are not much in control of the external factors. Sometimes there are big increase in demand. So therefore, we should seek also some development in our capacity alternative. Now, in that concept of developing capacity alternative, this means being the organization being flexible, whether to expand or what's the level of expansion or to shrink the capacity of the organization. Again, these are alternative. Number one, whenever we design, we always want to consider some design flexibility into our system. So how do we do that? Paano natin kino-consider yung design flexibility? Converting, for example, a portion of the warehouse space, should be for inventories, to be part of the operations area of the organization. So there are certain level of flexibility. Kung sabihin, pwedeng i-collapse mo yung building, yung wall rather, collapsible wall, tapos nag-expand yung iyong operation. Or take stage within the product life cycle, take stage of the product life cycle into account. So, asa na ba tayo? Kaya sa introduction pa ba tayo? Nasa growth pa ba? Or nag-mature na yung produkto and we expect it to decline? So again, it also talks about alternative because obviously, if we see our demand, and vis-a-vis the product life cycle is still in growth rate, so therefore we expect also growth in our demand. And that's also affecting our capacity. Another would be taking the big picture approach to capacity change. So meaning to say, talagang babaguhin mo na kasi tinignan mo yung sabi nga dito, big picture overall that okay, the demand will really increase and we really need to adjust our capacity whether to increase or to decrease. Prepare to deal with some capacity chunks, meaning to say whether some idle time or maximum capacity, yan. Attempt to smoothen out capacity requirements. When you say smoothing out capacity requirements, matching it to our demand. And most importantly, identify the optimal operating level. So itong alternatives can come in different ways. For example, no, yung operating hour, pwede mong gawing 8 hours or 12 hours or sometimes 16, 20 hours yung operation or sometimes 24 hours yung operation. That's one way of designing your capacity alternative. But of course, no, ang maapektuhan dito, not only the maintenance of the machine but also the level of human resource but also the supply. So meaning to say there should be alternatives. We should be ready for some alternative because in as much that we want to design and forecast the demand, design the capacity and forecast the demand, so minsan talaga hindi siya nagkakatugma. Moving forward. You see, in this case now, we now identify that there would be some probable bottleneck of operation. So when you say bottleneck, so these are operation in a sequence of operation whose capacity is lower than of other operation. So 3 operations. So these are, for example, 4 machines into operations or let's say step number 1. For step number 2, nagkakaroon tayo ng bottleneck because we can only accommodate let's say 30 per hour, while we are working with 10 or rather 4 machines producing 10 per hour. So sabihin, step 2 will be bottleneck. So dito papasok yung sequence of operation whose capacity is lower than of other operation. Okay, so what about this? For example, we have a 3-process operation. So operation 1, operation 2, and operation 3. Each with their required capacity design per hour. Yan. So for example, operation 1 will require 20 hours, while operation 2 will require 10 hours, then operation 3 will require 15 hours. Yan. So overall, we can now identify our bottleneck. So this bottleneck are problems, that require solution in operations management. Okay, and at the end, we have the maximum output rate, with limited bottleneck only at 10 per hour because of the bottleneck, and their output of only 10 per hour. Ibig sabihin, ang lumalabas dito 10 lang din. Imbis na 15 yung kaya niyang i-produce. Okay? Because yung unang proseso mo can produce 20 hours, twice as your second part of or second process or operation, which is only 10. Okay? So again, these are operation problems, that again we need to define. Moving forward, so in our design capacity, with regards to product and service, we need to understand the concept of economies of scale. So when you talk about economies of scale, if the output rate is less than the optimum level, increasing output rate would result in decreasing the average unit cost. So economy of scale means to say the optimal average unit cost. Ibig sabihin, yung pinakamababa na average unit cost. Okay, defined by, again, number 1, yung output rate natin, less than the optimal level, with and in consideration whether or not to increase the output rate or decrease the output rate, or rather increase the output rate, resulting to decrease in our average unit. So later on, we'll have some example with that. No? On the other hand, you have this economy of scale. This time, our output rate is more than the optimal level, where increasing the output rate will result in an increased average in our unit cost. Ibig sabihin, tataas ngayon ang per unit cost mo. Nagkakaroon ka ngayon ng this economy of scale. Nagkakaroon ka naman ng economy of scale pag napapababa mo yung ating average unit cost. Yan. So, ito yung production cost na tinatawag. So, in any operations, we need always to understand the level of economy of scale. Okay? So, in this case, to better understand that concept of economy of scale and this economy of scale, we now look at our optimal rate of output. Okay? The optimal rate of output with consideration to our production unit have the optimal rate of output for the minimal cost as per minimum cost and average cost per unit and the rate of output. So meaning to say, with and in that consideration, we want to identify the minimum average cost per unit. Ito po yun. Wherein, we are achieving the lowest or the minimum cost per unit at a certain rate of output. So dapat ito lang yung natin po-produce. Kasi pag tumaas pa itong ating rate of output, what will happen with our average cost? Pag tinaasan mo yung rate of output at tumaas yung cost natin, nagkakaroon tayo ng diseconomy of scale. Pag binawasan mo naman yung rate of output, at tumataas naman yung, o pag tinaasan mo yung rate of output, pero bumababa naman yung ating average cost, ibig sabihin bumababa yung minimum cost natin, nagkakaroon ngayon tayo ng economies of scale. Okay, so economies of scale, this economy of scale. Yan. Okay, so moving forward also, and again, I will be interrupting this discussion for me to discuss this further. Okay, so this time we want to look at this concept of economy of scale with the minimum cost and the optimal output rate are a function of the size of our production unit. So for example, okay, should we operate on a small plant, a medium plant, or a large plant? Given, for example, their respective output rate. Siyempre, no, pag mas malaki yung planta, mas malaki yung output. Pag mas maliit yung planta, kukunti lang yung output niya with reference to zero. But then again, okay, we also take into consideration the average cost per unit. Operating a smaller plant will give you lesser output at this average cost per unit. While operating a medium plant, hypothetically in this example, will give you this average unit with this level of output. But in and for consideration with this hypothetical example, operating a larger plant, yan, so sinasabi, mas napapababa natin yung ating average cost at mas marami tayong napoproduce. So you might as well consider this. Again, these are hypothetical example. If and when the operating will give you what level of output at a certain level of average cost. So at the end of the day, no, yung average cost importante yan kasi yan yung kumbaga yan yung lumalabas na puhunan mo per unit. Yan yung average cost mo per unit. So mas mababa yung average cost mo, mas maganda for the organization. Say for example, the product is selling at 20 pesos per unit. Then your average cost is 15. So if you're selling it at 20, you have 5. But if you can lower that average cost to, let's say, 12 or 10, then basically double your profitability level. With reference to, again, hypothetically, that's the price in the market. Okay? Anyway, moving forward, okay, we have what you call evaluating alternatives. Yan. So this time, okay, we will go beyond this concept. No? We'll now talk about some cost volume analysis and break-even point, some financial analysis or cash flow and present value. We'll talk about the decision theory and waiting line analysis, in which, again, no, this is another topic for operation management. So very briefly, we'll tackle those topics. Anyway, moving forward. Yan. First, we look at the cost and volume relationship. Okay? Remember, okay, very briefly, pinag-usapan na natin yan. Yung output or yung volume at saka yung cost with regards to the concept of economies of scale. Okay? But then again, no, we want to consider, for example, a in-depth discussion of the relationship between cost and volume with regards to the three types of costs. The fixed cost, the total variable cost, and of course, our total cost. Now, very briefly, when you say fixed costs, these are costs that are, again, fixed. No? These are costs that you cannot adjust and it remain fixed with your operations. So for example, yung rent, yan, fixed yan. So whether or not you're maximizing the space or not, it's the same fixed rent that you are, diba, you are paying. So fixed cost yan. Pero may mga variable costs. May mga variable costs yan, yung mga human resource, yan yung mga machine, yung materials, okay, and capital, na pag tumataas yung output mo, tumataas din yung cost mo. Okay? So, this time, si total cost naman, it's your variable cost plus your fixed cost. Okay? So again, so in consideration, you have the fixed cost, the total variable cost, and the total cost, okay, in which we want to consider this in our operation. Well, now, most probably, you have tackled this topic in economics, okay, in particular production and cost. Anyway, moving forward, okay? Another concept that we need to understand is that with regards also to the total cost and variable and fixed costs, okay, the other side of the story is the total revenue received by the organization or the business. Revenue, kita. No? Now, this also, okay, is a relationship this time, okay, of the amount and volume. So other side of cost is the amount, okay, or the price versus the volume. So technically cost din yan. Pero cost of product, which is this time ang definition niya price. Okay? Now, in that concept, okay, we want to take into consideration, okay, that, okay, this time with and in consideration to your total revenue and your total cost, the difference between your revenue and your cost is your profit. Okay? Yan, parang sales, okay, sales, total revenue, less cost of goods sold, okay, total cost equals profit or gross profit. That is basically in accounting, no? Yan, yung COGS mo, yung sales revenue, yung sales less COGS is your gross sales or your profit. Gross pa kasi meron pang mga ibang expenses. Pero anyway, okay, the intersection, yan, ito, intersection na to, yan, okay, is now defined as your break-even unit. Meaning to say, the quantity or volume of unit in which your total cost and total revenue with this particular amount or level of profitability interacts. Yan. Okay? Or intersects. The intersection point nila, no? Anyway, to further understand this, no, we now break it down and consider, okay, not only our capacity planning per machine, for example, okay, and the quantity that it can produce, okay, but this time we consider the step in our fixed cost and variable costs, okay, per machine. So fixed cost, variable cost, total cost for machine 1. For machine 2 and machine 3, you have the same story with fixed cost and variable cost. And of course, fixed cost and variable cost equals total cost. Okay? Moving forward, this time, okay, we need to consider that there are or there can be some multiple break-even point, okay, per machine. So for example, in this case, machine 1, you have your total cost, okay, rather total revenue and your total cost. Okay, for machine 2, you have your total cost, okay, and this is now your break-even point. Okay, if you use the machine 3, again, you have now your break-even point with in consideration with your total cost and your total revenue. So anything above your total cost is a revenue for the organization. Okay, so you have several or multiple break-even points. Okay, now, assumption, okay, with this cost volume analysis, again, okay, this topic has been discussed probably in operation, in economics and in production cost. So understanding this does not only require our understanding of operation management, also our understanding of economics and business analysis. Yan. So sabihin, kailangan multiple facets yan. Kasama na din si accounting. Diba? So, but with and for consideration, or having been said, no, the following are assumption, okay, of the cost volume analysis. Number 1, let us assume that one product is involved. Isa lang muna. Because it will be a different story when you consider the cost volume analysis and you're producing different products. So, posibleng magkaiba yung cost ng magkaibang produkto. So, our first assumption is that we are working with one product only. Although, again, it's not impossible that there are multiple products, but again, that would be a different story. Number 2, everything produced can be sold. So, meaning to say, okay, the demand equals supply. Okay? Everything we produce is sold. So that is our assumption. Because again, it's a different story when we have surplus, and it's a different story when we have shortage, because most likely surplus and shortage will affect the price. Alam naman natin yan in economics. Pag may shortage, tumataas ang presyo. Pag may surplus, bumababa presyo. Okay, number 3, variable cost per unit is the same regardless of the volume. Again, this is an assumption. Okay? Although the variable cost, we understand that it basically decreases with and increases also with respect to volume increase and decrease. Number 4, fixed costs do not change with the volume. So again, it's fixed costs. Okay? Basically, this is probably the most likely of our assumption. The fixed cost will not change. Ito yung mas realidad, no? Number 5, revenue per unit is constant. Although again, it can have some other factor, but per assumption, it is constant. And number 6, the revenue per unit exceeds the variable cost per unit. Okay? So revenue exceeds cost. Again, these are our assumption of our cost volume analysis. But then again, these are hypothetical assumptions. Okay? Umpisa pa lang sinasabi ko, okay, most likely you will have multiple products. Most likely, not every product you produce will be sold, etc. So, again, the most reliable of those assumptions is the fixed cost, which is supposedly not changing. Okay, moving forward. Okay, in terms of financial analysis, okay, our cash flow, okay, there are difference between cash received from sales and other sources, and cash outflow for labor and material overhead and taxes. Cash flow, papasok, sales, alabas, gastos. Cash flow, ba? Ibig sabihin, tumatakbo yung business mo, may pumapasok, may lumalabas. Nagkakaroon ka ng profit kasi may naiiwan. Second, financial part of our financial analysis. Again, there is more to this. Okay? Number 2, present value. The sum in the current value of all our future cash flow of an investment proposal. Yan. So, ibig sabihin, sum of current value, okay, of our cash flow. So, meaning to say, sum of inputs, sum of output. Okay? Present value of our business, meaning to say, what level of profitability again can we produce out of our operation and our capacity. Yung kapasidad ng paggawa natin, gaano kalami yung kaya natin produce. Okay? What else? Okay. Some brief discussion regarding decision tree. Okay? Although again, this will be another topic. Okay? Helpful tool for financial comparison. Okay? Because again, we are making supposed to be decision in this decision tree. Okay, and this decision tree provides us with alternatives under condition of risk or uncertainty. Okay, it is suited to capacity decisions, and again, this will be supplemented in chapter 5. Yan, yung decision tree pag-usapan na ibang part, no? Ibang this is chapter 5 but ibang chapter, no? Anyway, okay, waiting lines. Yan, queuing. Theory, no? Useful for designing and modifying our service system. Waiting line occurs across wide variety of service system. Waiting lines or queuing are cause of bottlenecks in the process unless otherwise we have a defined queuing process or waiting line, a smooth flow of waiting line, and it helps the manager plan our capacity level. Okay, and it will be cost effective by balancing the cost of having customer wait in lines and the cost of additional capacity. O yung tanong dyan, no? Papilayan mo ba sila o magdagdag ka ng panibagong booth para mag-handle ng magdagdag ka ng panibagong empleyado, magdagdag ka ng panibagong gastos. Okay, what is the cost and what is the profit? No? So again, these are another chapter, but then again, it's most likely whether or not, okay, you want your customer to wait in line or you want to improve your capacity. Okay? And then finally, Yan. Actually, that ends our discussion because there are some video clips that, if possible, I will also present. Okay, so again, once again, this is Operation Management. This is Chapter 5. Okay, this is Professor Franklin Ayuson. Thank you very much for listening. Have a blessed day ahead. Maraming salamat.